What's up, theory creeps? Welcome to another lockdown video. It's day 15 of my quarantine. How's your quarantine doing? As promised, today we're going to be talking about Maurice Blanchot's The Writing of the Disaster and COVID. Now, I also have a meta goal or a sub goal for this episode. I'm going to stay on topic. We're going to talk about Fox News and Trump because they're kind of indistinguishable. And we're going to talk about The Writing of the Disaster. Period. No tangents, no wandering. Boom. One of the main critiques you hear of the right from the left is that they're dishonest, that they misrepresent the truth. Now, I don't put truth in quotation marks because I think the right is actually, being honest. I agree. They do manipulate the truth. The problem that I see with the leftist perspective is that it's tied to truth, period, and that there's this belief in reality and this kind of self-righteousness that comes with having access to that reality. That's what I find problematic about how the left criticizes, Fox News or Trump. Another way to put this argument is that it's representational. The right, the Fox News and the Trump narrative is not honest. It's representational. It represents the truth. There's layers of mitigation and distortion as the right looks at the world, and thus the left assumes that they have a more kind of clear, focused view of how things operate. In this video, I want to try to get away from those assumptions. So we're going to consider how Fox News writes the disaster, specifically the disaster of COVID. So what kind of representational tools does Fox and Trump use to describe the disaster? But we're also, in traditional kind of post-structuralist fashion, going to reverse that question. And we're going to talk about the disaster of Fox News and Trump's writing. But first, I want to do just a brief introduction on Maurice Blanchot, in case you're not familiar with him. He was born before World War II in France, lived through World War II and the reconstruction of Europe. He was a huge influence on post-structuralists such as Derrida. Blanchot, along with like Mallarmé and Levinas, are kind of these like foundational pre-post-structuralists. Like they were writing before post-structuralism had really been hashed out. But they're the sources that guys like Derrida or Deleuze really kind of draw inspiration from. In particular, The Writing of the Disaster is concerned with how writing contaminates truth and how truth and representation kind of mix in writing, and how this is disastrous for an enlightenment or a kind of a Platonic approach to reality. So in particular, as I mentioned in the last video, post-structuralism is really concerned with disasters and catastrophes, and in particular like the Holocaust and World War II and that kind of thing. So this book is no different. It's very interested in disasters and how they resist representation. But it really just starts there, because when you say that disasters resist representation, you're assuming a level of truth in a disaster that writing or speech is failing to communicate. But that's really not what Blanchot is saying. For him, disasters are representation. It's not that they resist representation, it's that they're pure representation. Blanchot says that the disaster is forgetfulness, and if you refer back to some of my older videos, you'll see that writing is also tied to forgetfulness. The idea is that our natural faculty for memory will be supplemented by the dangerous supplement of writing, which will undermine our ability to remember and to think, etc. The idea here is that repetition in writing and supplementation of the original are bad things. This is just where Blanchot starts, though. Like, he wants us to reconsider this privileging and take a more kind of egalitarian, leveling approach to speech and writing, to reality and representation. He says, desire of writing, writing of desire, desire of knowledge, knowledge of desire. Let us not believe that we have said anything at all with these reversals. Desire, writing, do not remain in place. What if the disaster that's ravaging our planet right now isn't a virus? I mean, there is a virus. Don't get me wrong. I'm not some conspiracy theorist. I do believe that COVID is a real thing, even though I've already spoken to a few people who don't think that. But let's just say, for the sake of this thought experiment, that the danger that we're facing isn't a virus. It's the representation of the virus. It's the way that politicians are responding to the virus with rhetoric and economic kind of selfishness, as opposed to like genuine action and genuine compassion. To me, that does seem to be more dangerous. Like, if you look at places like South Korea or Japan, they managed their crisis so much better that it makes me wonder if the crisis that we're facing is actually the virus, right? Like, again, I'm speaking metaphorically. Obviously, the crisis we're facing is the virus. But again, if you look at places where it was managed properly, it wasn't as big a deal as it was here. So the question that I'm trying to ask is how much of what we're facing now is rhetoric and the result of discourse? The disaster is related to forgetfulness. Forgetfulness without memory. The motionless retreat of what has not been treated. The immemorial, perhaps, to remember forgetfully again.
Lower than just about anybody. It's really working out, and a lot of good things are going to happen.
And we are responding with great speed and professionalism.
It's going to go away.
Yeah, no, I don't take responsibility at all.
We're going to all be great. We're going to be so good. This came up. It came up so suddenly.
This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries.
Trump really is inventing history from day to day. There is a forgetfulness to the way that Trump speaks and the way that his supporters listen to him. And what if he's right? What if there is no time? What if there is no truth? What if forgetfulness is the way of the universe? Well, then Trump is deploying a narrative that adheres to the rules of reality. He's using the kind of postmodern, post-structural hyper-reality of the modern world to his advantage. Every morning he wakes up and looks at the world and says, okay, what story suits my interests best? What will make me the most money? What will keep me in power longer? And he doesn't think about what happened the day before because he doesn't need to. Whatever story he tells, that's the truth. That he creates his reality. He's like a medieval king where his word is law. It has this kind of performative, generative quality to it. His speech does. Now, if we look at things this way, we'll see that the problem with Trump isn't that he's a liar. Again, Trump is a liar. I am not trying to say that Trump isn't a liar. I'm just trying to see how we can use postmodern perspectives to help us react to the COVID crisis in particular. I'm trying to stay specific, which is not in my nature.
She said there is no magic drug for coronavirus right now, which you would agree. I guess on this issue,
I think we only disagree a little bit.
Sorry.
I disagree. Maybe and maybe not. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. We have to see. We're going to know.
So if Trump isn't lying because there is no truth, then what's he doing? He's telling a story. So the problem that we're encountering as the compassionate, rational left is that our stories are tied to reality. Like, we're shackled to these antiquated understandings of truth, and they're preventing us from concocting a narrative that is as effective as our opponent or opponents. What's the difference between lying and telling a story? Nothing really. In both interpretations, Trump is concocting a narrative that ensures his wealth and his political power. And in fact, it's nothing that's the difference between lying and telling a story. When we lie, we omit the truth. But when we tell a story with no relation to reality, because there is no reality, only representations, then there is nothing to omit.
Chloroquine, and some people would add to it hydroxychloroquine. So chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine. Now, this is a common malaria drug. It's also a drug used for strong arthritis. Somebody has pretty serious arthritis also uses this in a somewhat different form.
Like any good science fiction author, Trump knows that he has to stay close to reality. He can't venture too far away from our daily experience, or else his narrative would spin off into abstraction. Or like a stream of consciousness, like it would stop feeling like a story. So that's where this Dr. Fucci, it's probably Fucci, he seems Italian. Anyway, he seems like the kind of foil, I think, to Trump. The goal is to kind of balance Trump's insane anti-science narratives with something that looks like science. But again, in Trump's world, everything is superficial. Everything is a veneer. It's a cheap gold foil. It's styrofoam that he puts over concrete to make it look like marble. Trump is a snake oil salesman. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a stake in the companies that make this chloroquine stuff. Honestly, him or Jared or one of his kids, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if there's some economic incentive for his completely insane insistence that this drug will help people. Anyway, so Fucci, in this clip that we're about to see, actually says that he would seek a chloroquine treatment in the context of a clinical trial if he gets diagnosed with COVID. And it's just like, who is this man? How is this doctor in charge of what's going on in America right now? It's totally insane. He's so obviously just a puppet for Trump. Like literally, he's like a ventriloquist dummy that the Trump can use to pretend to be scientific. Like he can use scientific jargon the way that Trump can't. But his message is completely identical to Trump's.
Would you feel comfortable taking one of these new antivirals, such as hydroxychloroquine?
You know what I would do, Laura? There are a number of clinical trials. I'm a believer in a clinical trial because at the same time, I'd want to help myself. I'd want to get an answer as to what really works or not. So I might take one of those drugs, but I would do it within the auspices of a controlled clinical trial. I've always felt that way.
And so you would take one of those drugs because we are getting some positive results. And this is wartime, right? So it's not all buttoned down and controlled. We do what we can do with what we have.
But we have to watch out here, because the truth is, within this postmodern perspective, Fucci isn't doing anything wrong. He's actually just putting on a performance like everyone else is. We don't want to mistake the appearance of professionalism for authentic professionalism, because there is no authenticity anywhere in the world in the postmodern perspective. So the WHO and all of their like actual kind of UN-y official personalities are no more authentic than Fucci. I can't get his name right. The WHO or any like more medically legitimate professional personality that's talking about COVID, they're just performing medicine better. Like, I don't mean like performing the act of healing people. I mean, they're like performing medical dialogue. They're getting on stage and presenting themselves as a doctor better. But it's still just a presentation. It's just a more in-depth presentation, a more rigorous kind of adoption of a persona. I don't want us, if we're keeping this postmodern perspective going, I don't want us to start thinking that Trump and his scientific goonies are lesser than WHO officials. They're all just performing.
If you've ever worked out with a trainer,
yes.
Let's say they tell you you're going to do 15 squats, 3 sets of 15, and you finish that, and then they say, "All right, one more set of 15." And
right.
You're like, what? That you? Can I make it to Easter?
Yeah.
Can I make it to Easter? Yes, I can make it to Easter. Now, if at that point they say, "You know what? We got to do one more week."
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I can do one more week.
And Dr. Fauci, Americans want facts and transparency, but they also want hope. So what hope can you give them tonight?
You know, I mean, the
hope is a mistake.
So in these clips, Fox is being pretty transparent about what Trump is doing and how they're helping him. They're just telling people, like, look, what Trump is saying is representational. The goal isn't to tell you what's going on in the world. It's to inspire a feeling in you. And they're not problematizing that at all, which is super postmodern, right? Like the traditional Enlightenment Platonic approach to Trump's optimism, to put it kindly, would be to say that it's a lie, would be to say that it's untrue and not related to reality. But again, on postmodern, post-structural Fox, he's just assembling a narrative, and that narrative is evaluated on its merits as they relate to the audience, not as it relates to any kind of objective reality, because again, there is none. Now, this chloroquine narrative is already getting dangerous. It's already killed a few people who have consumed aquarium cleaner because it has a similar name to this drug. These healthy people poisoned themselves because of something the president said. Now, I mean, I don't know if I'm blaming Trump for that. I mean, to some extent, he is to blame. These people also ate aquarium cleaner. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure we can really pin those deaths on Trump and his administration, but there's going to be a ton of deaths that we can pin on Trump and his administration and their poor response, especially in New York, which is now the epicenter of this pandemic in North America and maybe in the world. And it's no secret that Trump has a vendetta against New York, and a lot of reporters have been talking about how he's been limiting federal supplies to the state. So again, is the disaster COVID, or is the disaster the writing of COVID? So this is like a topical way to access Blanchot and the writing of the disaster, but it's extremely simple. I don't want you to get the impression from this video that the writing of the disaster is meant to say that the representations of disasters are disastrous. I think it's a useful thing to think about in relation to COVID. It's not specifically Blanchot's point. It's more a starting off position that he moves on from. Like, the first sentence of his book actually complicates everything I just told you. It reads, "The disaster ruins everything, all the while leaving everything intact. It does not touch anyone in particular. I am not threatened by it, but spared, left aside. It is in this way that I am threatened. It is in this way that the disaster threatens in me that which is exterior to me and other." We could say that the correct thing to do in response to these liars would be to tell the truth. But that assumes a lot of things. The first thing that I see the left and general like proponents of social justice falling into, the trap that I see them falling into is that they assume the truth gives them power. They assume that by researching the truth and by showing people evidence and convincing people through rational, progressive, developmental arguments that they're going to have a stronger position than their opponent. That's just not the case in most debates, in most discussions, in most, mass media kind of circulations of a subject, especially on the internet. Depth of evidence doesn't really matter. What matters is the appearance of your argument and its like immediate effect on the audience, like the superficial effect that it has on people. That's what matters. That's what people walk away with these days, much, much more than a depth of evidence. And I just don't see the left understanding that. It robs you of your flexibility being tied to the truth in this way. The right and racists and the alt-right and all those nut jobs, they don't really care what they say. They don't have to make sense. That's not their goal. Their goal is mostly to be adversarial. So I think that's the important thing to remember here, is that people are not rational. People don't make decisions based on progressive evidence that develops a clear case with, well-researched, truthful facts. That's not how people think. People are emotional and superficial and visual these days. They're not really auditory. They're not conceptual. We absorb things very quickly through our eyes and then make a decision based on what we see or how we feel about what we see. And in this postmodern, hyper-real environment, no argument is true or false, authentic or illegitimate. They're just well-made arguments or poorly made arguments. The kind of objective ethical code that so many leftists would like to see in the world, support the poor, social health care, minority representation, minority rights. I'm really worried in these videos that I'm going to come off as being against those things. I'm not. I do believe that those are good things. I just don't believe that they're objectively good things. They're things that we have learned are good things, and they are. Like they improve the lives of everyone around us, including our own life. Even if we're not part of those minorities, they make our life better. But that doesn't make them like platonically true. You know what I mean? It makes them common sense. But those rules, those ethics of supporting people who are in need of support, that's not written into reality the way that some leftists seem to think that it is. So to put it in terms of Plato and the Enlightenment and the kind of things that we talk about in this channel, because the truth is this isn't a political channel. I don't know very much about politics. So if we see that writing is a kind of lesser version of speech, if speech is original and therefore good, and writing is secondary or supplemental and therefore bad, we could say that the left's position on truth is platonic. It's like that, right? The left sees real things. They see the truthful, objective world around them, and then they look at Trump and Fox News and they say that is a lesser representation of the world. It is a repetition, a representation of the truth. It's a skewing, it's a distortion. But Trump and his lackeys and Fox News, they know that writing is its own thing. It's not tied to speech. It's not tied to reality. You can represent things that are in no way real and bring them into being. They're like magicians. And the left, for the most part, is just not really able to perform the tricks that the right is. Anyway, I think that's probably enough. I think we're probably around 30 minutes or so once I cut this down. So that's it for this video. I have another video coming up Still on Fox, still on representationality in right-wing media. I'm going to start working on that one probably pretty soon. So stay tuned. Theory Creep out.